On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, Canadian railroads go on strike. Sorry. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, Canada's National Railway and the Canadian Pacific Kansas City Limited Railway went on strike as of this morning, August 22nd, 2024. This is not just stopping the movement of trains across Canada, but it's having an impact on the global supply chain. We're going to look at that impact not just in Canada, but on the maritime networks, and also discuss what this means going forward. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel. You may also want to check, and if you have subscribed to my channel before, check to make sure you're still subscribed. YouTube has this pesky habit of unsubscribing people. I don't know why they do it, but they do. Here's a story over in Captain Bloomberg. Canada's Railways lockout unionized workers snarling trade. So this is going to cost about $1 billion in Canadian money per day in trade. And believe it or not, that's still a substantial amount of money. It's Canadian dollars, 740 million US dollars. 9,000 employees of Canada's National Railway and the Canadian Pacific Kansas City were locked out after a deadline passed. Members of the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference voted to strike over a number of issues, including scheduling and worker fatigue. We're going to look at this in a second. The economic consequences will be swift. Both railways control about 80% of the national railway. They've had labor disputes before, but it has been decades, almost 6 decades, since we've seen a major issue. We're already starting to see the impact with grain futures trading higher and even lumber companies beginning to shut down in the movement of goods across Canada. This is a map showing you the Canadian National Railway and Canadian Pacific Kansas City. You can see the impact this has had from ports on the Pacific, Vancouver and Prince Rupert, all the way across to Halifax on the Atlantic Ocean, and even down into the United States. Now, I should note, strike is only taking place within Canada. The railways within the United States are still operating. However, a lot of the cars and equipment that would be coming into this region are not coming in. So you're not going to see the disturbance just across the Canadian provinces, but you're actually going to see it rain down into the U.S. Midwest. And that is going to be significant. Another story over in Captain, Trudeau calls on railways union to reach deal to avoid strike. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called on Canada's 2 largest railways and unionized workers to reach an agreement to avert the strike. He goes on here, my message has been straightforward. It is the best interest of both sides to continue doing the hard work at the table to find a negotiated resolution. Millions of Canadians, workers, farmers, business right across the country are counting on both sides to do the work and get to the resolution. It goes on down here. Brendan Lacerda, an economist with Moody, estimated the direct economic damage of a rail strike would be 341 million Canadian dollars per day, roughly a little over 200 million US dollars. That estimate excludes indirect impacts such as a hit to consumer and business confidence or an increase in the rate of inflation. So here are the notices that went out. This is from Canada Pacific, Kansas City. Today it issued notice to the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, Train and Engine Division, and the rail traffic controllers of their plan to execute the lockout at 01 minutes Eastern Time on August 22nd if union leadership in the company are unable to come to a negotiated settlement or agree to binding arbitration. Same thing here over with Canadian National. They announced their lockout here. So both sides locked out the workers from going to work. So the question becomes, what's the heart of this strike? Why are workers at Canadian National and Canada Pacific Kansas City going on strike and being locked out of work? So this is the formal notice that the union put out. Despite months of good faith negotiations on the part of Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, both parties have begun their lockout. Throughout the process, Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City have shown themselves willing to compromise rail safety and tear families apart to earn an extra buck. The railroads don't care about farmers, small businesses, supply chains, or their employees. Their sole focus is boosting their bottom line, even if it means jeopardizing the entire economy. That comes from Paul Boucher, the president of Teamsters Canada Rail Conference. So there is several key issues at play here. This is a previous post that they did, but it really goes in detail here talking about what the issue is about. So the main obstacles they come up with. Both companies claim to be affected by labor shortages and are seeking ways to maximize output from their crews. Now, labor shortages have been true across the board, especially since COVID. And railways, both in Canada and the United States, we saw this with Union Pacific, are dealing with this. And what railways have begun to do is to lengthen trains and reduce crews. I mean, in the United States, you went from a half-mile long train out west with 4 crew members to a 2-mile long train with 2 crew members, with talks of going to 1 crew member. And that has caused a lot of concern. Going on with the statement from the Canadian Teamsters, companies are asking for significant concessions over scheduling and fatigue management that will lead to safety risks. Sleep management is extremely important. We see it in all forms of transportation. There was just an NTSB report released here in the United States about a tug collision that took place on the Mississippi, and that was caused by sleep deprivation of the crew. Goes on here, in addition, Canadian National is attempting to impose a forced relocation plan that would see workers ordered to move across country for months at a time, tearing apart families. So you're not just working for this railway, but you're going to have to go where the railway sends you. And that obviously is a big issue. It goes on here, rail safety and forced relocation at the heart of the impasse. If the companies get their way, train crews will be forced to stay awake even longer, raising the risk of derailments and accidents. Critically, rail workers are already held to exhausting work schedules. Many need to remain available and on call for almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This callback schedule that train companies have is grueling. You can't really go anywhere. You can't be anywhere because you may be called back. And as it notes here, once called in, they have only 2 hours to report to work, often without knowing where they'll be able to return home, the same day, the next day, or even later. So if you're more than an hour away from home and you don't have everything with you and you're on a 24-hour callback, you either have to carry everything with you, be ready to drop and go and leave your family wherever they are so that you can get to your train and go off and not know when you're going to come back. This is a horrible schedule. It really is. It is not conducive for family life. And understand, people take jobs for really 2 reasons. Number one, for money. The other reason is for stability of family. I'm dealing with this right now, talking about stories in shipping where we're losing mariners because they are not getting stability in their lives. They're not sailing on routine schedules, they can't make any plans, and therefore they're leaving. The U.S. Navy's Military Sealift Command right now is talking about laying up 17 ships to free up the crews to man the other vessels in the fleet. We just saw the Royal Fleet Auxiliary stage a strike because of issues over pay. We're seeing port strikes around the world. India is about ready to have a port strike. The United States East and Gulf Coast is getting ready to have a port strike unless issues are resolved. And this is one of the key ones we're seeing here, is family life is crucially important. And it seems as if the rail companies aren't looking at this. This story goes on, compromising on safety and tearing apart families are not solutions to understaffing. Both companies should be looking to improve working conditions and adopting a more humane approach to attract more personnel. Rail workers have fought for safer and more humane industries for decades and will not accept moving backwards. That's Paul Bashir. Now, the impact this is having, we're seeing, is across the board. This is a statement from Maersk on 20 August talking about the impending rail strike. Currently, the Canadian National Railway formed the union of its intent to lock out the 6,000 employees. It goes down here. We can confirm that we continue to accept bookings to and from Canada, including ocean, rail, truck, and air. As the situation remains ongoing and developing, we're in close contact with local officials and authorities, as well as partners on the ground, and continue the situation. We endeavor to keep you informed of developments that may occur that impact your supply chain with Maersk. So Maersk is already sitting there saying, listen, there's going to be disruptions. We're going to see it. This story over at Splash 24/7, Sam Chambers has even more information. Drewry's latest container indices published today show that while global spot freight rates continue to decline, rates from Shanghai to Los Angeles climbed $98 up to $6,401 for a 40-foot equivalent unit FEU, while rates from Shanghai to New York grew by $47. So we can potentially see another increase here in rates. Liners have been making contingency plans ahead of the well-telegraphed strike. Hapag-Lloyd announced measures to mitigate the impact. For imports in New York, a diversion fee of $350 per bill of lading will apply for containers on water destined for Canadian ports. The company is also advising customers to explore alternative trucking options within Canada, because if rail's not open, you're going to have to use trucks. CMA CGM issued a notice detailing several measures, including potential rerouting of vessels to U.S. ports and restrictions on rail shipments. The company has implemented embargoes on specific intermodal shipments, including hazardous material and temperature-controlled containers across its network. You don't want a container getting stuck in the system. In Canada, railway handle a substantial portion of the container traffic. Vancouver, the nation's top, ships about 2/3 of all cargo volumes by rail. The port stated yesterday that any strike would have a significant impact on operations. So Canada's western and eastern ports are going to become congested. You're not going to be able to get the cargo out, which means you're going to have to stop. Now, understand, you just can't reroute a ship. It's not like, well, we were going into Vancouver and now we're going to go to LA and Long Beach. It doesn't work that way. You've got to have the provisions ashore to take those containers. You got to have a terminal, you got to have a berth, you got to have warehouses, you got to have road and rail set up. And when you start shifting into other ports, that's going to cause the problems. Ships arriving you don't expect. And we can expect to see that on the U.S. West, Gulf, and East coasts. And if those coasts get jammed up, that's going to impact the movement of containers coming in and out of the ports. And this is why a rail strike in Canada has such a big impact. We saw vestiges of this a few years ago with the Fraser River flooding, when Vancouver and Prince Rupert were cut off, and you couldn't get rail from central Canada across. We're in the end of August, heading into September. We've got grain exports that are going to start piling up. Not going to be able to move them both internally in Canada and, more importantly, to the ports. So expect to start seeing disruptions. The longer this goes, the more the disruption happens. But let me be clear, just because the threat of the strike looming has been causing issues. And now with the strike in full place, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And all of this is shaping up for September 30th, 2024, when the ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association, contract expires with the U.S. Maritime Alliance on the East and Gulf Coasts. It is going to be worse than what we saw on the West Coast with the ILWU and the PMA, because this impact is going to be timed right toward a presidential election. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, because it was a terrible episode. Once again, we're talking about consternation, congestion, and just a cluster across the ocean shipping chains. 3 Cs. If you enjoyed today's episode, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Hey, make sure you're still subscribed. If you like the channel, give it a big thumbs up, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Hit the super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Till our next episode, Sal, signing off.